Are men behaving badly? A topical, political, and quite frankly fed up with the absolute state of things podcast about mental health nursing in the UK. Your hosts are Stuart McKenzie and me, Ed Freshwater. Welcome to the show. Good evening, Stuart. How are you?
I don't know what to say. Having watched the news today, it looks like London is quite literally burning.
Yeah.
I don't mean it in a funny sense. I mean, genuinely, I have no idea what is going on. So it seems like the pod's a welcome break to what else is happening in the world. How about you? How are things down in your neck of the woods?
Well, I'll be honest, and normally we start the beginning of the show is normally quite a jovial place where we sort of joke around and sort of rip into each other and rip into what's going on in the world and have a good laugh about it. But today, I think I watched the news and I realized something. I realized that my hair is short enough and my skin is pale enough that I could probably punch a police officer and get away with it scot-free right now, and that has got me really pissed off.
Yeah, it was watching some of the footage of older guys almost indoctrinating younger guys into the violence, which was really quite worrying. And in terms of from a mental health nursing point of view, you're looking at that in a way, just thinking how many victims, how many casualties on all sides, people indoctrinated into hatred and violence who end up hurt. Cops who went out to do their work, regardless of their politics, hurt. Multiple. I've seen a report that lots of people in the park who were just out for an afternoon with their family got hurt, all for the sake of I don't know what. I mean, I suppose the mainstream media would let you believe it was to protect Winston Churchill's statue, but it appears not the case. So anyway, I suppose we can lift the mood now rather than and get into a bit more of a serious chat. For those of you who've been around, we've done our comedy evenings and had a bit of music as well. A bit of a different vibe this evening, and I think given the state of things in politics and the state of things in the mainstream media, I think it's a nice welcome change, and I'm sure you'll all really appreciate our guest this evening, Darren McGarvey, who has joined us, the author of Poverty Safari, a book that Ed and I have spoken at length about in relation to health inequalities and lived experience. And I don't have to, I'm preaching to the converted as mental health nurses. We've tried a lot over the last 20 years or so to understand the communities we're in rather than doing things to people, doing them with people. But I think we've still got a long way to go. So Darren's really given over his time to get out of bed, stay in bed with the Baines to join us tonight and give us his views. I'm absolutely, I'm clear that, it's about people having opinions. We really want to encourage you guys to be able to maybe pick up on some of the things that we're saying or you hear Darren saying. For those of you who've read the book, please, if there's aspects of the book that you feel you want to, I think the book's even more relevant now, everything that's happened in the last 13, 16 weeks in particular. What about you, Ed? What's your views?
Well, I will say just ahead of doing tonight's show, in the last few days, I've been trying to get my background information and my research done. So, of course, I've Googled Darren to make sure that I've got some good information about him. And the number one thing that comes up when I search your name, Darren, is an interview you did with Krishnan Gurumurthy a couple of years ago. And I just want to kind of make sure that you're under no illusions you're getting that level of journalism off us tonight. There's certainly not going to be...
That's quite an easy one.
I sat and watched that and I thought, oh, that's what a proper journalist does.
No, I've had harder interviews than that.
No, we hate to hear about you.
The thing about going to London is when everyone has just heard of you, so they think that you've just been created in a test tube.
Yeah.
Actually, I went down to London with about 10 years of experience. So, people begin by talking to you like you're a kind of newbie. And then actually they realise that you kind of know your way around an interview. So that's what I enjoy most about going to London, because it's like, because you speak with a Scottish accent and then there's the working class vibe that just I give off, no matter if I turn up in a 3-piece suit and loafers, then actually as much as you might watch that and go, oh my God, that's proper journalism, I didn't feel challenged at any point, and a journalist's whole raison d'etre is supposed to challenge you. So I thought that was quite a generous interview.
I was thinking more along the lines of me accidentally making a mistake and then swearing, which Krishnan would never do.
You would never swear anyway, Ed.
No.
I don't know what you're talking about. So so I would very much say you're amongst friends this evening, Darren, and people who are trying their absolute damnedest as clinicians to make a difference to people's lives and trying their best to, particularly at the moment, a lot of our services have been marginalised even further as the great militaristic conquest of COVID-19 continues. So for us, I go back to my point about Poverty Safari being, I think, even more relevant now. From my perspective, Darren, looking at stuff, I think you've got to just jump straight in. Looking at what's been going on this past couple of weeks, I've gone from the point of the Black Lives Matter escalations and the horrific events in America to where we're at today in London with scenes of violence and upheaval in the streets of London. What are your views on watching that? Where do you think we're at in terms of that society, that shift in society? What's happened to perpetuate this?
Like, this is just the chickens coming home to roost when our society, or at least the people in charge of our society, are too beholden to the interests of wealthy and powerful people. Now, I'm not saying that those interests shouldn't be taken into consideration. In the sort of society that we live in, you need people who run big companies that employ people and innovate and compete with each other. And I'm not one of these people who says everything about capitalism is evil, but I can't shy away from the very material effects that you see from 3-4 decades of wage stagnation, wealth polarisation, all of the social marginalisation that comes with it. Millions of jobs being moved overseas because it's cheaper for multinational companies to produce goods that they then sell back to us, that we get into debt to buy. And ultimately, what you're seeing, if you look at the events in London today, you can look at it through a couple of different lenses. So if you just look at it through a mental health lens, what you're seeing, if you look at these men, you're seeing predominantly working class men who come from working class communities where due to the fact that actually there's no access to social mobility in the sense that politicians mean it when they use that redundant term, then everything about their identity is ascribed to them. So this ascribed identity differs from middle class identity, which is an achieved identity. So that's where you begin to see your dichotomy between Brexit and Remain. A lot of people feel quite invested in the society as it is. They like the idea of globalisation because they're insulated from its effects, because they are working in specialist professions that can't be shipped overseas. Whereas the people in these other communities, which have become increasingly run down, especially over the last decade of austerity, libraries, schools, police, fire services, everything has been affected. Then this ascribed identity, in order for politicians to regiment it and make it feel included, then they have to invoke these myths about Britain and our history and our place in the world. I'm not saying everything Britain has ever done is terrible. The Enlightenment happened here. We've contributed a lot to science and art and music, and that stuff has to be acknowledged. But the central fallacy that sort of drives this notion of Britain forward in the minds of people who have this ascribed identity, who define themselves by things they have no control over, like football teams and the estates that they grew up in, then encoded in that myth of the British nation is white supremacy. That's the racial justification for all the things that we engaged in. And unfortunately, when we talk about white supremacy, we think of the KKK with their pointy hats on, setting fire to things, setting fire to crosses, lynching people. But actually, white supremacy is a lot subtler than that. So white supremacy is also the news reporting and a crisis in education, because white kids are doing just as bad as black kids, and things like that happen all the time. So these people, when they internalize this myth, and a symbol of that myth is these statues, which a lot of these guys know nothing about, right? They've just been told the statue means Britain, therefore it's a proxy for their identity. And so what they're doing is they're beginning to make first contact with social reality, where they haven't been selected by history to do anything great. Their country doesn't give a fuck about them, and it's painful, you know. And if you actually analyze the kind of the disposition of these men, if you're unfortunate enough to catch them on camera for more than 5 seconds, you'll notice that all of their body language, everything about their kind of physicality is consistent with chronic stress, right? And so that's the sort of emotional state that a person needs to be in order for that resentment to turn into a xenophobic attitude or a racist attitude. How many racists do you know go to meditation classes? How many racists do you know coming out of yoga? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Holding a book about spirituality. The whole idea that you are superior to another race, or that you need to go and fight another race, or internalizing myths about another race. It's when a kind of dodgy intuition one day is allowed to fester and become a genuine viewpoint. We all have these biases, we all have these thoughts, we sometimes think things we would never share with other people, but a lot of us are fortunate to be in communities or social circles where that stuff is, we're talked down off the ledge of that stuff, or we say something stupid out loud and we're corrected. But increasingly in these communities, people have those attitudes confirmed for them, or they'll be drawn or endeared to your Nigel Farages or your Tommy Robinsons or your Katie Hopkins, and a kind of mainstream media that's made up of middle-class professionals who have such low proximity to the social conditions which give rise to these attitudes that they can't even correctly diagnose it if they wanted to. And so when you look at it through the mental health lens, you see how poverty, stress, anxiety, economic and cultural insecurity, whether real or imagined, contributes to kind of this fertilization of the community just becoming ripe for these ideas that have nowhere to go. And ultimately these guys have been failed time and time again by the political class. But unfortunately, that's not an excuse in my mind. So you're just seeing a lot of chickens coming home to roost. And while I don't condone violence of any sort, I think that you've got to look at the intent behind the violence. You've got people down in London there today specifically going to cause violence. Mm-hmm. The Black Lives Matter protests, that's an entirely different thing. These are people that are trying to show social solidarity across the oceans. They're trying to send a message to powerful people that there will be no more discussion because they've not listened up until this point. So there's no evidence that engaging in the usual manner is going to reap any benefits for anyone except the status quo. And so they're going into this, they're going into their action with a whole philosophy behind them, a whole history behind them. And these other guys, man, do you know what I mean? Like, one minute they're want to protect the statues, next minute they're pissing on them. Like, they don't know where they're coming or going.
It's interesting because, and you're right, it's chapter 23, the housekeeping chapter in the book, Darren, about the type of approach that Cathy Milligan and Robert Fulton take in their local politics, calling it the bullshit, dealing with it directly at the same level that it's happening, because these individuals have a locus of control. I don't mean control in terms of making people do things, but they're at the centre of their communities. Do you think politics in the UK is so broken that we can't even start to repair the damage that poverty causes, and that we just need to push beyond that and find a new system or a new way? Or is it about trying to get back to investing in what we have as a democratic system?
Look, I think a lot of the strain that people feel right now is a sense that there's an impending calamity. So there are factors at play that shape how people feel about their lives and their sense of security, as well as economic issues about how much they're getting paid. So if you think about the 20th century, right, these things were characterized by big events like war or a pandemic or an economic depression. We're currently going through a multitude of these things simultaneously. And we have this other thing in the mix, which is social media, which is the kind of military grade communication technology that individual human minds are not evolved to use to discuss complicated issues. So that adds to a sense of the volatility. So obviously you have very real issues around the material conditions in which people are living, and the inequalities that create those differential conditions, whether you're born in one postcode or another postcode. This will indicate your likelihood of living to a certain age, what school you'll go to, how much you'll be paid, what sort of illnesses you'll have in your life. And the differentials, as you guys will know, working in the health professions, are massive, are massive. But in the mix as well, I think as people feeling a sense of impending doom. And because of an absence of leadership, true leadership, where, a figure with a certain degree of emotional intelligence and articulacy, and someone who might not agree with big cross sections of the population, but recognises the benefit in speaking in a language of reconciliation. We just don't have anyone like that right now. And unfortunately, without someone telling the country a story that a majority of people can get behind, that's not about fake ideas of nationhood, but about us as people, then this situation will continue to get worse and get more out of control as other people try to come in and superimpose their narrative onto the situation, whatever that might be. So, on one hand, the poverty issue is as serious as it's ever been. And we're really going to see how much the political class and the business class and elites understand this in terms of who's going to pay for the current crisis. Because the magic money tree doesn't just exist. It's massive. It's a magic money rainforest, right? The amount of resources that become available when people, the idea that people might run out of money to pay for their gym memberships and their cars and their multiple households, the amount of money that becomes available then is quite frightening. So we're going to find out very soon who the governments of the world think should pay for all of this. Are we going to get a new social settlement? Are we going to get something radical like what the New Deal was like? Basically something to save capitalism. That's what these big social programs have always been about. Ultimately, though, I think what this political class in the UK are going to try and do is austerity 2.0. And really they're just sowing the seeds for more social strain, more tribalism, more health inequalities, more educational inequalities, basically all of the things that we've seen revealed as undeniable by this pandemic, whether it be the divide, the inequalities along racial lines, the inequalities along social class lines, along gender lines. I mean, up until the pandemic, people were still disputing that these things existed, that these things were real. But as we know, it sometimes takes an academic from an upper class background to confirm what a lot of people have been saying for a long time before anybody will believe it.
I think that's the when you shine that light on what Marmot wrote, he puts it very, very simply, and he says that's the phrase, put simply, if health has stopped improving, it's the sign that society has stopped improving. And that was 2010 at the head, on the cusp of the austerity agenda being launched by the newly elected Tory government. And for me, we're now in a situation where 10 years on the new Marmot Review, we know that, again, based upon your postcode, women's life expectancies have reduced, and within certain postcodes, they're spending longer of their lives in ill health. And how we get to a place, and you'd said about austerity 2.0, my view, and I've seen here as well, I'm just looking, Katie Sutton, if Katie'd introduced the idea there as well. I didn't want to miss on that just before I start rambling about how she sees the difference in the way white people versus black people are treated by police coming into the section 136 suites. Katie, do you want to have a quick chat about that? Do you want to come on about that? We won't force you, but I think it's a really interesting point, because that's something that I think we see as nurses. We've seen these variations in practice. We've seen the inequalities around, you know, the stereotypical views of how young black men are treated, in particular around that prodromal or that psychotic set of circumstances when they present. If anybody does feel they want to say something, then just put it on the side, because it'd be good to hear your views, and I'm sure Darren would welcome hearing the views of people in clinical practice or in care.
Absolutely.
Darren, we've got a question from a colleague, Sharon Morris, who's part of the pod, and she asks the question: how can we as mental health nurses truly support and understand our patients when their lives and experiences may be beyond our comprehension? How can we prevent ourselves from becoming part of a poverty safari?
Yeah. I mean, this is a big issue. The most important part of that journey of trying to kind of get closer in proximity to the experiences of the people that we want to help is just acknowledging that there is a distance there. I mean, I think this theme of social distancing is really big for me right now. Obviously, in the context of the pandemic, we're all being told to stay 2 meters apart from each other, and because of that arbitrary distance, most of the economy's been shut down for 3 months. Now, that's one kind of social distance. But I would say social distancing has been an issue in society for a very long time before the pandemic. And by that, I don't mean the distance you need to keep away from someone to not catch the virus. I'm talking about the distance that we are from each other, depending on our social class, depending on our gender or race, depending on our profession, our upbringing, where we were educated. You can apply that theme of social distance or proximity to almost any aspect of life in this country, and it will explain something about how there is a real lopsidedness in terms of the people who are in charge of facilitating the solution to all the problems and the people who experience the problems. And, you know, sometimes the distance is quite vast and sometimes it's a little bit shorter. Sometimes you get people who grow up on one side of the train tracks and they'll make it across the social ravine. Like me, I kind of come back and forward. You've got the social distance between people in the media and journalists who certainly do their best, but you can see that they're limited by their narrow social experiences when it comes to trying to understand the forces that shape the conditions beyond their media bubble. And that's another area that I've got insight, because I'm part of that a profession as well. So how do we shorten that distance between us and the people we want to help? Like I say, first thing is just acknowledging that distance is there. And then the second part, and I know this isn't practical all the time because resources are so scarce and there's immensely low morale in many professions as a result of things being defunded consistently over the last 10 years. But ultimately, one thing that's definitely been central to my activism and most of my work until very recently, when things just kind of went mad with the book, and it's pulled me away actually from the terrain that I understood so well for so long, is when you just walk alongside people and you don't have an agenda and you're there simply to learn. You're there to learn not just the thing that's associated with why you're there. So, you know, obesity, I'm here to find out why you're obese. Let's take a look in your fridge, right? As a metaphor. But just walk alongside that person, understand all of the different forces that shape their daily life, understand how they speak, what their priorities are in life, what shapes their viewpoints, how they communicate and express themselves. Because along class lines or gender lines or racial lines, if you're paying attention, you'll notice distinctions between how people communicate, between what people think is important, the language they use to express that, even their sensibility when it comes to things like morals, ethics, humour. There's vast differentials because we are shaped by our experiences, and in this country, social experiences are so extreme sometimes because of the inequality. So often I've found myself, I just like to get immersed in the lives of the people that I'm dealing with. And I don't decide what my agenda is until I've been around them for long enough to get a sense of what do they want? What do they want to do? What do they want to do with their life? You know, so much work that's set up, particularly through the kind of Blair years, where there's this massive explosion in the middle class because of Thatcherism, and then also this deindustrialization. So you've got loads of middle class people sending their kids to university, and then you're like, what are their jobs going to be? Yeah. Well, their jobs are going to be parachuting back into the poor communities and helping the people redeem themselves by adopting a middle class outlook on life. And after a few years, that just stopped working because the working class people were like, here, fuck off. You know, fuck off with your paternalism. Fuck off with this, that, and the next thing. You said this was about us developing our community, but here you are chaperoning us around, telling us to be quiet, telling us you're going to help us do what we want to do, but really you're trying to fit what we want to do into the objectives of your organisation. And a lot of the work that's going on in our communities is much about you ticking boxes for funding as it is about what people here actually need. We just wanted to set up a coffee morning. You want us to start a fucking committee so we can vote and have a treasurer and all that. Piss off, you know. And I'm speaking the way that people would speak, you know, in that scenario. And the minute people start talking like that, that's when the power dynamics start. So it goes right back to, we learn this in school, you know. As soon as a middle class person speaks, a working class person notices, right? And then they've got a decision: do they submit, or do they get kind of outlawed as an aggressive, challenging, antisocial person? You know, I remember in school when a teacher had announced to the class that I started a fight. She didn't know if I'd started the fight. I didn't start the fight. But because she'd announced to the class that I started it, she got me in front of the class and sat me stood me up at her desk, and she was a horrible teacher, right? Mrs. Dunsmore, her name is. Like, this is like a genuine Harry Potter villain, right? And she basically over and over and over and over just kept asking me, did you start the fight? Did you start the fight? Till I was so worn down and so exhausted that I just said, I did start the fight, to get out of it. And the minute that I said that I did, she punched down on the table. So you did start the fight. And all the pens jumped up. And I was just like terrified. I must have only been about 8 years old, you know? Like, and that right there, you know, that told me something about the world that I live in. She's a person in authority, a social worker, a cop, a politician. She speaks a certain way. She has a certain sensibility. And whenever she's unreasonable, or she's been a bully, or she's abusing her authority, there's always a justification for it. There's never any accountability for it. Or at least that's how it feels a lot of the time. And that's where people that come up in my sort of background learn about their place in society. So when we engage with people who come from those backgrounds, and we don't come from those backgrounds, we have to realise, a bit like systemic racism, that we've got these inbuilt biases that we learn as we go through our education, as we go through our social experiences. And sometimes it can be difficult accepting that we have them. I have them, you know, around issues around women, issues around people of colour, you know, like on a journey of not being defensive when I get pulled up for things I've said or opinions that I've expressed. It can be difficult, you know, it can be difficult. But if we're really invested in you know, closing the proximity gap and being closer to those experiences, then these are we need a lot of humility, we need a lot of patience, and sometimes we need to just kind of like be a bit of a sponge for what's going on, rather than someone that's always observing and analysing and passing comment on it.
I absolutely agree with that. I can, in various places, like what you're saying about language is just so true, because places that I've worked, especially the time that I spent working in child and adolescent secure services, and you've got a bunch of 15, 16, 17-year-old boys, some of whom have come from gang cultures further south, some who've grown up in really nice, nice, gentle middle-class families where nobody should ever have any problems, kind of idea. That's sort of perception. But they're teenage boys, and they get to swearing about stuff, and they're all, listening to. This is showing my age. I can't even remember who they were listening to.
But they're listening to the rap music,
this hip
the hip
and
hop.
the hop, and
Mumford and Sons.
Yes,
and they were all wearing tweed.
Yes, whatever the opposite of
waistcoats.
Mumford and Sons was. I say somebody's forgotten to warm my slippers again. But, they
That's
would
a really
use
highbrow secure unit.
Aye. But these kids, they would be using language that was appropriate for them. And they would say, this is fucking shite, and this is bollocks, and you're chatting shit. And they would say that, and the response that got from professionals, and bearing in mind this is inside a secure unit, so these are teenagers who are deprived of their freedom for months at a time, and the response that was given to them quite often was, we've got a zero tolerance approach to that kind of language. You get demerits. You don't get to watch your TV program tonight. You don't. And the thing is, for a lot of these kids, saying, you're chatting shit, wasn't, I genuinely believe feces is coming out of your mouth and I despise you as a person.
No.
It was just, no, I disagree. It was their way of saying, I disagree.
That language is the primary battlefield where class dynamics are concerned.
See, I've got a question here for Joanne Ingalls at Darren, which fits right into that narrative of language. Joanne asks us, what are your views on the language we, within services, broadly use to describe individuals and communities, and how this contributes to a constant oppression of communities? She says she's thinking specifically about terms such as deprived, disadvantaged, less affluent, higher tariff.
Sorry, the sound was breaking up a wee bit there. Can you just read the question out again?
No, not at all. So what Joanne asks is, what are your views on the language that we within services use to describe individuals and communities, and how this contributes to a constant oppression of communities? She's thinking specifically of the terms that you often hear, like deprived, disadvantaged, less affluent, higher tariff.
Yeah, I mean, I think deprived is a term that's okay to use when you're being specific about what people are being deprived of. So I think sometimes context for the terms, or actually maybe applying them in more radical ways. The problem that people have who work in professions is twofold. Either they are radical and they have to stop sounding radical in order to get a job, or they never were radical and they got the job because they weren't radical, and so they kind of buy into the fundamentals of the system, which includes all of these lexicons of terms that describe or falsely describe the communities, what's going on in the communities, so on and so forth. I think of a term, for example, like outreach, right? The term outreach, like that term tells you everything about how community actually works. When people who set up shop in community and bypass and usurp the hierarchies that are established within the community, and then they decide that they're doing outreach. What if the community wants to do inreach? Do you know what I mean? Like, what if the community's just like, here, hang on, we're doing a wee bit of inreach. What the fuck's going on in here? What are you doing here? What is this mad name that you've put on this building? You know what I mean? This used to be a boxing club. Like, what are you all about? Do you know what I mean? And I sit
with the liaison coordinator, Darren.
Exactly, and that blew my mind. That blew my mind when I met, when I meet other people who are longer in the tooth than me, like Tom Leonard, and just feeling like we're just kindred spirits, because he has been writing about the same thing that I am now writing about, and has a poem that pretty much his poem pretty much condenses all my book into a few lines. Like, that's the power of language. But even if you look at the career of poets who speak in that tongue, these people aren't celebrated until they're dead. You know, nothing was more evident of how much praise Tom Leonard suddenly received after he passed away last year. You know, it upset me. Not because I didn't want to see him getting praised, but because a lot of the people that are praising him are the same people that are going to pull you up for using certain kind of language in your music and taking a certain tone in a debate and all of these things that are inherent to your culture. They see as primitive or aggressive because they judge it through the lens of their values. So I think just generally, go back to the original point, which was about terminology. If you hang around, I mean, see if you walk alongside people for long enough, it'll become obvious. It'll become obvious what's appropriate. Because you'll find actually that despite what we often learn from media or education, that working class communities are not like they're not cultural historical vacuums that just need middle class people to enter them, to infuse them with meaning. Often, you know, people have got their own ideas about what their labels are and how they would like to be referred to. And like every other group in society, working class people or underclass people or whatever you want to call it, it's not a monolith. There is as much diversity of opinion, of culture, of so on and so forth within that group as there is in the whole wider society. So you need to spend more time around people. And then a lot of these questions about how should I speak to people or what language should I use, just becomes obvious. I mean, one of the things that you're not taught when you become a teacher or a nurse or a doctor or whatever is you are a human being. You are socially sophisticated. You have evolved to understand so many things at so many subtle levels as long as you spend a certain amount of time around other people. Now, our desire to connect with other people is obvious when we look at how many people use social media. The problem is we can only use language, we can only use words to communicate, but that's actually, not get too deep into this, but that's our most recent evolutionary acquisition, right? So we've got all these other building blocks of communication, body language, emotion, voice tone, gaze direction, all of the things that we do when we're in a room talking to someone, then the language has not got any meaning. It's just supplementary to all the other things that are going on. So you don't learn at university that if you just spend enough time around someone, you're emotionally going to connect with them. An emotional transference will take place. You know, especially if you work with young people, people who work with young people or even older people, you'll notice how quickly they emotionally attach because that's what they're programmed to do. That's what we're evolved to do. Unfortunately, in the social care professions or in you know, health professions, the thing that's reinforced often is you need to keep distance. You need to keep your social distance. You can't get over involved in this, that, and the next thing. It's absolutely right. You can't play God and try and get involved in everybody's life and end up detrimentally impacting your own mental health. But there are aspects where if you could just not identify yourself as a professional, but just as a human being in the world, and just allow all of that emotional software to come online and just do what it does, then you become more intuitive to other people's desire, what they want, what they need, how they express that. And more importantly, you develop a rapport with them where actually when you give your opinion on their life, they're more likely to take it on board. See, you need that rapport, but people will only emotionally give you that place in their life and their experience when they can trust that you're not just part of a rotating cast of professional characters.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I know that's not an easy thing to do because you don't get paid enough and you don't have enough time to do that, but it might even involve doing it in your own time.
A wee personal anecdote that slightly, you know, that fits into the language of that. Many years ago, my mum was and I worked in educational social work in the Wine Alley, Darren, in Govan. And she essentially worked with the kids who were truant, weren't going to school. You know, the teachers would phone up. There would be after school creches, there would be kids clubs and stuff like that. And she used to have a time where she would be in the Broomlin Road nursery. It's not going. And she was in there one day, and she tells this story of this very prim and proper teacher sent as a supply teacher to the Wine Alley, and she'd previously worked in the West End. And so my mum, who was based in there, was having a chat with her. And I worked a wee bit for my mum before I went away to do my nursing. And she says she's in the playroom, and she'd been speaking to this teacher, this new supply teacher, and the kids were over in the water trough playing. And the wee boy says to this wee girl who's playing with, "Stop splashing me with the water." And the teacher says to him, "Now, Jason," I don't know what the wee boy's name was, I just picked Jason. "Jason, it's not water, it's water." And so she just carries on talking to my mum. And the wee boy goes, "Listen, stop splashing me with the water." And she interjects again, and she goes, "Jason, I've already told you, it's not water, it's water." And my mum says he turned around and looked her right in the eye and went, "See, in my fucking house, it's water, right?" And my mum just looked at her and says, "Well, you see, welcome to the Wine Alley. I was trying to tell you, you can't just come in here."
No. You see, there's a good point in there, which is part of one of the byproducts of a kind of imperial society, right? That's a kind of pyramid where the people in charge are at the top, and their values and their aspirations are kind of filtered down through the various institutions and then internalized by us in the middle classes as just being universal, right? So that's what partly excludes people along lines of language or their moral framework or their experiences, because everybody's subtly kind of informed by what people at the very top think is appropriate. And so what you're seeing there is somebody saying, no, somebody without even realizing it, saying, no, our culture is just as important as your culture. We are not on a conveyor belt where we're all just waiting to be able to speak like someone on Radio 4. So the way that we speak our language, it's not evidence of barbarity or a lack of education. It's its own living, breathing organism. It's not even a language. It's like a Lexus. It's like that's what Tom Leonard would have called. There's a big debate about Scots being a language, and other people saying no, it's this thing that lives and breathes and moves with the time. And that's, you know, all the different dialects all across the UK. I mean, 2 to 3 weeks ago, I was on Question Time. There was these horrible technical problems. I couldn't even see on the screen what was going on. I had one earpiece in, so I was dealing with lots of issues. Then I realised it was live. And so imagine the stress that I'm under. Right, yeah. I'd only been asked to go on the night before, right? And the stress that I'm under, I can't see visually the cues to when I should talk, when I shouldn't talk. So when Fiona Bruce asks me a question, I just keep talking until she tells me to stop. But I don't realise there's a 3-second delay as well. So she's, in her mind, stopped me from talking, but I've not heard her. So I'm continuing to talk. And on TV, millions of people think I'm just cutting over people and I'm just this mad Scottish person that just won't shut the fuck up, right? I guess that is partly true. But what happened was Piers Morgan then just tweeted this picture of me, and he just said, "Who is this raging lunatic?" And so I had actually been as calm as I can be. I was being very polite. I was being very precise. I was only elaborating where I felt that it would strengthen the overall point of view to demonstrate what I mean, because I know who I'm talking to. When I'm speaking to a Question Time audience, that's a mass audience. So you can't be kind of a specialist with the language as you might be in a discussion like this, where everyone here is part of a specific sphere, so you don't need to explain some things. There's a shorthand to it. And, you know, for 48 hours, all I got was abuse of people online, saying I couldn't talk right, speculating if my alcohol problem had affected my ability to be articulate. And it was like, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I can speak English better than most English people. You know, it was because my actual dialect and what that tells people in an imperial culture. So it's because, one, I'm Scottish, two, I'm working class. So that's 2 strikes against me straight away. It doesn't matter what I say. That's already a sort of a filter that people are mediating what I'm saying before they've even engaged with the actual meaning of the words that I'm using. And, you know, unfortunately, the people who could better work towards removing some of these or becoming aware of some of these barriers, they can't detect them because they all speak in that received pronunciation. And they think that's their real accent. You know, like, how can Kirsty Work sound the same as George Allegaya? Like, you know what I mean? Like, but somehow they all sound the same. You know what I mean? And it's just like that.
But do you mean you don't aspire to the BBC Scotland dialect?
Look, see, I'm pretty sure.
Darren, listen, I just have to ask you, would you mind?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the amount of, like, I did a TV series up here last year. Like, it's the first thing I've done where it was pretty much just universally well received, right? There was no controversy, there was no snidey review, there was none of that, right? It was just, everybody was just like, this is good TV, this is, we need more of this, right? And it was because it wasn't a journalist who doesn't experience poverty going into a community and waving a camera in somebody's face while they shoot up, right? And the amount of times I've been invited to London to speak to Channel 4, BBC, Radio 4, all the people who are getting into media would want to have meetings with, I've met with them. And you know what? Nothing ever happens. Do you know why nothing ever happens? Because they have concerns. I bet you 100%. They have concerns about how someone who sounds like me would translate to that wider British audience. And it's just like, it's a load of shite, you know? Yeah. Like, literally, that's as Glasgow as I can put it. It's a load of shite.
Stuart started using the word pish quite a lot, but just building on that, Darren, we got a question from our colleague Ali Upton, who I think is here as well. Give us a wave, Ali, if you're there. She was saying from early on in your book, it kind of appears that you were not able to be yourself in a lot of situations and sort of not use your own voice. Has that changed now, or do you still feel you've got to put on a certain persona for different situations?
Well, good question. I think we all have to wear masks at different points. Sometimes actually I think maybe I've got myself into trouble in the past because I've decided unconsciously or consciously to just be authentic. And then it's came back to bite me because you can say something that can scandalise you, or you say something that then is replayed to someone else out of context, and you're not thinking and speaking. I think a couple of interviews I've done in the early days, where really good journalists will make you feel like they're just sitting listening to you. You forget you're being interviewed, and they'll be listening intently to you, and they're not necessarily trying to manipulate you. And I remember revealing something about myself. I think it was like a criminal charge that I had. And it was like, and the interview was because I was promoting my new role with the Violence Reduction Unit. So then I'm talking about this criminal charge, and then the journalist is like, look, I'm going to have to include that. Do you know what I mean? That's important that people know that you've got a criminal charge. But the problem where it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to conceal it, was because all the backstory behind it is really like a lot of things that end up in court. It's a bit more complicated than what appears on the fucking citation, right? And I just remember being really, really nervous. And the journalist, thankfully, like, we went back and forward a wee bit, and everything was cool. But I just remember at that point I was like, I need to try and get the balance right between being authentic and being open and not being as guarded as a lot of people in the public eye, because I think that's partly what people listen to me for. But also I've got to protect myself, because I can't be in every situation where I'm being discussed, putting somebody straight and saying, actually, you know what, this is what I meant. And really, like, from a very young age, I think I've always had that hyper awareness, you know, that goes beyond what a person needs to function socially, and really strays into chronic, you know, when I was a kid, there's a bit in the book about it. I used to say something and then repeat myself under my breath to kind of scan what I had said for errors. So getting it right, how I spoke, what I was saying, was really important to me from an early age. And I think part of that awareness is what's helped me refine my communication skills, which, you know, I'm aware are pretty good, you know, in terms of, that was what was ironic about being criticised by all of these people on Twitter because of what Piers Morgan said, because I can speak to the top politician in this country at a book festival, and then I can go and interview people on the street. You know, I can go and speak to somebody like Tom Hunter, you know what I mean, or have tea with a famous author, and then I can go into a prison and capture everybody's attention within 5 minutes of meeting them. You can't do that if you're not a good communicator.
No.
So what's ironic is that I'm a better communicator than a lot of the people who would judge my dialect and say that I wasn't an effective communicator, because I've actually got a real broad diversity of social experiences that inform all the different modes that I can adopt when I'm communicating. Like the way I'm talking right now, like I'm getting into a flow now because it's took me 10 minutes to realise who am I speaking to, what's the vibe here, okay, this is the gear that I'm in for this discussion, right? Like, but if it was a discussion about hip hop and it was all young rappers and grime MCs, you can best believe I would be speaking different.
Yeah.
And so being able to move and shift in and out of those things, sometimes, yeah, it can be disorientating for me. In terms of sometimes I can lose a connection with who am I? How do I speak? You know what I mean? Like, how do I talk? This is probably more of a reflection of how I speak and how I think. The way that I'm speaking right now is very close to what the internal dialogue is. The words that I would use, the language that I would use, the tone that I would take. A lot of the other times what I'm doing is I'm reaching into my past experiences, or I'm making educated guesses about, you know, how can I draw this person in, or da-da-da-da-da. I feel quite relaxed right now. But I mean, it's especially the last couple of years, you know, with all the success of Poverty Safari, and that was no success that I could have foreseen or would have had the gall to even try and predict. I just was focused on finishing the book, and it was hard enough doing that. So for everything to blow up the way that it did, obviously I was grateful. It's changed my life. It's changed my life for the better in so many ways. But at the same time, there are things about it all that I struggle with now, because of the way my life's changed. You know, and really I've realised it all just goes back to me as a kid. You know, one, I don't trust people fundamentally. I don't trust people. I don't even trust my own wife on a fundamental level. I trust her as a person, but on a fundamental level, I always think, why is she doing nice things for me? You know, what is her angle here? When people are generous to me, when they say nice things to me, on a fundamental level, so fundamental I don't even detect it. I just live with this feeling that everyone I'm dealing with is presenting me with some kind of falseness because they have some other agenda. Like, I'm aware of it, so I don't let it inhibit my relationships too much, whether personal or professional. But I have learned that about myself, especially in lockdown, where you really have to just contend with you. You can't identify yourself by your profession when you can't go to work. You know, you're just sitting there with you. And so, like, the other aspect that's been difficult is while obviously I'm going to draw on a lot of these experiences the last couple of years in the new book, Because if middle class people love hearing me talking about poverty, wait to hear me talking about being middle class. They're going to fucking love that. I'm going to give you every.
They've got a patent on that. They've got a patent on that.
Excuse me, while I just have some of my San Pellegrino, I'll just.
You know, like, no, but I'm not just talking about. I'm just not talking about the lifestyle. I'm talking about how you, as a middle class person, live in a country where you're allowed to hold beliefs politically that cannot be reconciled with each other, like capitalism and equality, while at the same time believing yourself to be the adult in the room. You know what I mean? Like things that I have seen up close and experienced, that pool of the centre ground where everything on the left and everything on the right is just a horseshoe, and a false equivalence can be drawn between any 2 points, just so you can stay in the middle of the bed. And, you know, so many things about my experience, but at the same time, you know, earning money, becoming publicly noted, it's pulled me away. It's pulled me away. I mean, I still live in an estate. I don't want to move. I like where I live. I have great neighbours, but I've got like 2 off sales, 2 chippies, 2 bookies, like 200 feet round the corner from my house. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, I don't feel part of this anymore. I don't feel part of this. I feel part of the community. Aye, hello, blah, blah, blah. But deep down, it's like the wee guy in Pollock. You know what I mean? Don't trust anyone.
You spoke about, it's interesting in Poverty Safari that really resonated with me, Darren, about I grew up in a high-rise flat, and you spoke about how you know, they had this shadow in the city. Eh? I always have this view when I went away and done my training in Aberdeen, but I knew I was home when I hit the Kingston Bridge and I had that vista across the south side. And you could navigate every part from Castlemilk all the way through, or right across the south side. You knew exactly. You could almost. It was like a compass. You didn't need a map. You just looked for whatever. You knew Caledonia Road was there, and Waddell Court was there, and Stirling Fold and Sandyfield Road and stuff. But there's interesting. You talk in the book about how when people went to watch Norfolk Court getting blown up, and there were different responses. So I went down the day that Sandyfield was getting blown up, and I got to the top of Cathcart Road, just as you come across where the motorway is now, and I had to turn back because I didn't want to get it seen blown up. I didn't want to see that happen because there was all this view of how bad things. So that's that view from the people above at the top of that pyramid about how bad things were. But actually, I had a lot of investment in that. I had a lot of happy memories of my family and my friends growing up in these places. And then fast forward 3 years, and they've built a big health centre on top of it. Right, so I'm in there for work, and I'm sitting in the reception thinking, "Fuck, this is where the lifts were." This is so. I get that there's a better standard of healthcare there now in terms of there's a better building. But the whole concept of sitting in that class structure and being at the top of that pyramid, and you know, the economists and the town planners all making these decisions about housing, and you're saying again about that detachment for the estate, although you're still in it. I go down and visit family, and I feel that. I feel that conundrum of that loss of connectivity, but still harking back to a time, you know, 20 and 30 years ago. I don't feel judged by them when I visit them. I don't feel that judgment. I think you've got enough that it resonates, that they know you were in that, and they don't judge you for having moved away from it. As my granddad used to say, the whole plan for you, son, is to be able to last in their world, knowing that they wouldn't last 5 minutes in yours.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much for what you said there that resonates with me. If one of the things that a lot of people from more middle class or upper class backgrounds don't understand, and why would they? Because it's not their experience, is that their communities are built to last, their schools are built to last. So when a physical space endures over a long period of time, then lots of social connections are become deep rooted, a shared history, a shared sense of identity, a shared sense of place. Even the familiarity of knowing this family stayed there, that family stays there, being a well-kent face, as they say, in some parts of Scotland. When communities, through different processes of regeneration, right through the 20th century, even right up to now, are demolished. And not just demolished, but their history is buried or fetishized by middle-class coffee shops or murals. But ultimately, when you're knocking those buildings down, as horrid as those buildings are, often designed by upper-class architects who saw them as kind of feet in the door of an architecture career, then what you do is you uproot all those social connections. Now, social connections are not just about knowing people. You know, like like when you think about when I'm in the gym, right? But it seems like a long time ago now. Do you know what I mean? When I'm in the gym,
what are
right?
gyms again? Remind us all. Yeah.
I always train harder when I'm training with someone, right? Always train harder when there's someone there who knows me well enough to know when I'm about to give up and knows what to say to push me for one more rep or 10 more seconds of exerting myself. Always train harder with someone. That's social connection, right? See, after I come out of the gym and I go to the cafe that's next to the gym, I remember one time I was there and I had trained so hard I was almost sick. And I went over and I said, I just need something to eat. And because I was familiar to them, they made me a full breakfast, but they put extra items on the breakfast and they didn't charge anymore. Now, I can feel a swell of emotion right now. I don't even know that lady's first name. She probably knows mine now. But still, that was something that can only occur when there is a rapport that develops through seeing someone regularly, even when they're not necessarily one of your primary social relationships, like a family member or a friend. So when communities are subjected to economic forces that mean H&M and Boots move in when times are good and then they all get to fuck when times are bad, how the hell are people supposed to form these social connections in communities where they can have not just the economic security of knowing that there's work and their community's not falling into dereliction every 10 years, but also just that sense of, this is where I live, the people are nice, I feel supported in my community. Instead, what we have now are all the middle classes all scratching their heads, wondering, why do the drug dealers feel so bold that they will be selling bags of heroin within spitting distance of the police office? Do you know what I mean? Like it's obvious if you live in those communities that the issue is that the economic circumstances lead to cheap decisions being made for short-termism, and then every 30 years the whole place needs to get fucking flattened and everybody needs to get dispersed and all of these social connections are severed. And it's not just that sense of familiarity and security. I mean, there's an immense health benefits from feeling secure in your community, from knowing people. The health benefits are there's just such a multitude of them. And as well as that, when you feel socially connected, then it means that informal social controls can emerge within a community. And there's an absence of them in the poorer communities, and that's why you need more police. Right? I think of Liverpool, right? You go to Liverpool, they don't even, you know a newspaper is hated in a city when W.H. Smith doesn't even stock it in a fucking train station. Yeah. Right? Now, what is it in Liverpool? How does every single person in Liverpool know it's unacceptable to buy the Sun? How do they know that? There's no law that says that. There's no rules that say that. It's because of informal social control that emerges in a community that unites around a shared goal or a powerful story. And there you have it. The Hillsborough disaster created that, right? Even in the conditions of poverty that are as bad in parts of Liverpool as they are anywhere else. You should read Margaret Thatcher talking about them in her fucking one of her memoirs. You know what I mean? And like that's the deal. That's the deal. But people in upper class professions, they'll be like, oh, you know, clearly these people are lazy. That's why they don't cut their grass. They've not read up on the broken window effect. They've not read up on the academic research that says if people live in a community that's fallen constantly into a state of disrepair, everybody just gives up tidying it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I remember, last thing I'll say, contrasting two different places. I was in a wee sleepy fucking, village in Perthshire, right, called Burnham, right, and they were having their first book festival, and this was a big moment for the people of Burnham, and I got invited along, and then in the evening after the first day, you go there, it's a posh dinner, the editor of the Times is there and all that, and all these people, and they're all talking. No self-respecting town shouldn't have its own book festival. So this wee village, which has been established for so long, there's a myth in the area that there's a tree so old that Shakespeare wrote about it. That their big aspiration as a community is to start a book festival, right? And that is a really laudable and admirable aim. And I was dead happy to be down there. See, when I was down there, I noticed a lot of things. I noticed that the hotel I was staying in didn't have a door locked. It had a sign on it saying, just open the door. Mm-hmm. I noticed that the phone box had tinsel wrapped around it. It was a beautiful red phone box. It had just been painted, or else it had been painted years ago and nobody had graffitied on it and nobody had pissed in it. It was one-off sales. And see, any time I went out to smoke, as I often do, not only did I become aware of the fact I was the only person who smoked, but also the pavements were so immaculate that I just felt a sense that I must go and find a bin for my cigarette out, no matter how much I couldn't be bothered, because I would pay some sort of immediate social cost for discarding it on the street. And see, 2 weeks later, I was working in Postle Park, right? And I spent about an hour talking to the heroin dealer outside the local MP's office. And the ashtray was ripped out of the wall of the side of the pub and thrown on the floor, never mind the actual fagged outs. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the difference between these two communities? And the people in Burnham just happen to be good, and the people in Postle just happen to be bad? I don't think so.
You know, I think when you put the two contrasting communities together like that, Darren, and again going back to the book, because obviously that's what drew us to bring you in. You spoke briefly there about the two sides at the left and the right, and some communities have benefited from particular approaches in politics, whilst others have found themselves pretty much forgotten. Do you think moving forward, a phrase that I hate, but anyway, in the future, as Britain emerges from the current pandemic and the lockdown and all that will bring, do you see a further fracturing of the politics of the UK along national lines or regional lines?
I think most of us should be coming out of this with being open to the idea that we all need to rethink what our politics are. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of us voted in the last election based on one political issue? You know, there are certain issues that have been driving electoral politics and consuming all of the headspace and resources of the political classes in Scotland. It's been independence, and down south in the UK level, it's been Brexit. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, these issues aren't important, but funnily enough, while we're in a crisis that in many ways shows the failure of globalization on multiple levels, at the same time, what we're learning is that part of the reason that there's been a failure in the global response is because of the low quality of leadership that exists, because we're going to the ballot box and just voting for the one issue that politician says they're going to sort out, and not thinking about all of the other potential issues that might arise once that particular idiot is the most powerful person in a country. Like Donald Trump in the White House. And for nearly 4 years, I've been sitting thinking, really, really lucky that there hasn't been a kind of 9/11 level event, because this man will not know how to handle it. And just at the point where it's looking like, you know, it might be over and the world comes through relatively unscathed, the worst crisis to happen in generations occurs. And it's no surprise that the lack of global response to this, of global leadership, it's directly correlated to the Muppets that we've allowed to get into power, because our politics has become a dichotomy between in or out, yes or no, and the world is much more complicated than that. Obviously, we all know that, and I'm not meaning to caricature people who, for their own reasons, voted for Donald Trump or voted for the Conservative government. But you have to really see the leaders like that, the low quality of leadership. That's really also another symptom of the deeper malaise in society. You know, how desperate are people? Where they're like, I'll bet the family farm on Boris Johnson getting the country together. You know, the people become so obsessed with getting out of the EU that they don't think, oh, this guy's going to be in power after that, and then what?
Yeah.
You know? And so just what direction politics take, you'd have to be tremendously arrogant if you hadn't predicted everything that's happened now to run about making predictions, too many predictions about what's going to happen in the future. You know, a lot of commentators, you know, they're phoning in their articles every week. This is what's happening, here's what's happening, here's my take on fucking everything. And it's like, here, man, I've been following you for a long time. You've been kind of wrong about most things that's been going on the last couple of years. You know, so I'm not actually going to be listening to you anymore. You know what I mean? And I'm unsubscribing for your publication because I think actually, on average, you talk shite. You know?
On a scale of shite and pish, it's further down
Who knows what's going to happen? But I mean, the people, powerful interests in this society, they better be getting the message soon that if they don't become willing to sacrifice more than just, you know, tokenistic gestures about equality and talking platitudes at Davos, then it's not only them that's going to have to retreat into their own wee forbidden city. Their whole economic project, their whole idea of globalization and capitalism and all that, like, it's going down the pan. It's going down the pan. And they'll have to align with fascists in order to keep it going. And like, that is the direction of travel. Like, just turn on the news. Just turn on the news. We're all still debating about whether racism exists, and there's fucking fascists out in the street, like, raging that black people have decided they've had enough. Like,
it's something else, and just as it keeps going, you just wonder what's going to happen once we're out of the EU, once they've shut the doors. What's going to happen when things don't get better for those communities? You know, like you say, the ones that bet the farm on, fine, something has got to change. Let's just vote for this dramatic change and maybe that'll do it. What happens if that payoff doesn't work out? You know, and it's kind of scary because that is so unknown.
Yeah, coming out of the EU is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, right? But it's a dangerous thing when you have certain people in power who are so numb and blind to a lot of the forces that shape life and attitudes and experiences further down the social scale. And you just need to look. I mean, I don't think anybody could argue that if you were looking simply at economic competence as a skill set, i.e. the books need to be balanced, can't be spending money we've not got. You can see, even just with the Conservative response to the pandemic in terms of economic response, that's an area, a very small area, where a few people in the civil service have showed a certain level of competence, right? Now, not in some areas, not so much competence, but the speed that they managed to pull together this furlough scheme, the support for self-employed people, the ease of access, the restrictions lifted on welfare conditionality, all of the things around austerity and benefits and sanctions that we were all saying were too harsh, all being removed, the whole welfare state being gentrified as millions of middle class people prepare to enter it. Like, all of that is good. That is all positive. Unfortunately, when it comes to all of the other social problems that impact the society and the shape that it takes and how that finds expression politically, a lot of these people couldn't understand it even if they wanted to. I mean, Brexit itself emerges out of that particular grouping of politicians being unable to correctly interpret that austerity measures that they brought in created the desire and the drive for retribution against immigrants, for borders, for this false illusion of security. Because actually it's not immigrants that are threatening them, it's all the economic orthodoxy that's going to continue whether we're in or out of the EU or not.
Yeah.
Which is, if a Chinese person can do your job's off, pal.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't see, this is that is what's threatening people really in the real world. So just it's more a kind of it's a failure of leadership. There's a because of that pyramid thing we were saying earlier. People speak a certain way, they're framed a certain way in media, they dress a certain way. So we assume no matter, even if they do idiotic things, and there's so many red flags that they're idiots, and there's so much news that comes about that tells you something about the sort of people they are and the sort of interests they have and how incompetent they really are. There's still this reservation within us. We think there must be some kind of method to the madness. You know, surely Boris deep down must have some kind of morsel of a plan of what his philosophy is for this country. Surely. I mean,
to be fair though, it's just a fucking episode of the Magic Roundabout. Do you know?
And it's sort of like, surely Dominic Raab must have some skill set, because you couldn't get elected being completely useless or, you know, completely empty of knowledge
devoid
and ability, you know.
But we've Darren. On you go, sorry, Dan.
No, sorry. Someone rightly pointed out, no, I was saying coming out of the EU might not be the worst thing. Obviously, if you live in Northern Ireland, that's quite different. And it's important to acknowledge that. But even still, the main tenet of my argument remains, which is whether you're in the EU or not in the EU, the question is what's the economic orthodoxy, what's the prevailing sensibility about how to organise a society, and as long as it's you know, reducing public services to skeletal services and undermining trade unions and all the mechanisms by which ordinary working people collectivise and
we've seen it. I mean, we've seen it so much. We've seen the situation, you know, in the last 4 to 5 weeks, where we know that coming at the other end of this pandemic, that all the people who've had the false platitudes and people out clapping and cheering for the NHS and key workers, we know that there's a fight at the other end of this. Mm-hmm. You know, just as we were going into the pandemic, we had academic colleagues in universities and colleges having to take industrial action for the way they were being treated. And thankfully enough for certain people in power, the pandemic came along at a right time where they didn't have to actually deal with that issue. But we know coming at the other end of this, we've got colleagues for the BME community who have been unproportionately affected by this, and the government still can't accept it. You know, they think they're 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks down the road for the fact that we didn't have enough PPE, that we'll have forgotten all of that. Mm-hmm. The reality is it has been an absolute bloody shambles. And when the people who, you know, not our generation, but the generations behind us go back and look in this, there surely must be some form of atonement, I would hope, that we start to think much more systematically about who we allow to actually do the paperwork, who we actually allow. And it's not about how you speak or how much money you've got in the bank or how big your assets are, you know, and equally it has to be about, have you actually spent any time in the communities with the people that you are choosing to try and represent, like it used to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, all of these things seem obvious to us, and I'm sure there are lots, I'm positive there are, I'm not saying upper class people have nothing to bring to life or society, or that they don't have problems, or that they're not human beings. I would never say that. And I've, like I say, my social experiences are quite varied, and I've met people from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of like different experiences, or at least got a sense of things. It's just that I think, you know, if you're educated in a school like Eton, and you're part of kind of, you know, these Bullingdon boys and all that, like, that's a certain type of person. that goes beyond just being mollycoddled or just being socially remote from the majority of the experiences in the country. That's a kind of cocktail of entitlement, and a sense that you are superior, while at the same time being so inept, but so inept that you can't actually detect how woefully inequipped you are to be in charge of an office of government, never mind the entire country. It's not to say, and where's the accountability? I mean, can we imagine a Jeremy Kyle show where you just wheeled out these wealthy people and you're just like, oh, is that fucking, what's that? How many people? Extra 30,000 people dead in the pandemic? Oh, you fucked up. You fucked up, eh? What does Graham think about that? Like get Michael Gove out on Jeremy Kyle. Oh, what was that? You were trying to bring in tougher drug laws while you yourself were getting full of Charlie as a journalist on Fleet Street. Oh, right, nice one, cool. Let's get the fucking lie detector out then.
It's interesting when you look at the challenge, because Craig, one of our listeners, Craig Davidson, had asked us to ask you a question, Darren, and it's actually more of a point now based on what we've just said. And he had asked, what's your opinion on nurses taking a stance on issues such as Black Lives Matter, such as standing up for Black, Asian, minority and ethnic nurses who've been exposed to inequalities working through the pandemic, rights for other minority groups, when we're then threatened as a profession by our regulator?
Well, I mean, when the actual mechanisms you're supposed to use to engage and get your point across are actually being used to stifle you, then that's where the need for radical action arises. And in many ways, unfortunately, as much as we're all sitting here, we're all talking radical, blah, 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 we've all been kind of neutralised to a certain extent. We all have something to lose. We all have a seat at the table. It might be a little seat. It might be a seat. No one really knows we're there. It might be a prominent seat at the table, but the minute that you're given a seat, suddenly you've got something to lose. So the whole idea of flipping the table upside down, setting it on fire, and just freaking everybody out and saying enough is enough starts to seem a bit extreme. Or maybe you feel that that's what you should do, but then you've got your own personal things that you want to conserve, that's what conservatism is. Mm-hmm. So obviously, like right now, I'm not going to be in the business of telling the young people that are out there actually like being prepared to go to prison right now for what they're doing. I wouldn't be in a position to tell them what they should do, or even tell people how they can support them better. But I think that that people need to be prepared now. The people that are out in the streets fighting, they're prepared to make a sacrifice, right? Like, I'm prepared to make a sacrifice. And what that sacrifice looks like, I'm not sure yet. But, operating within the system isn't always going to work. Or sometimes you need to suspend operating within the system. You need to show your teeth.
Absolutely.
And you just have to. And you just have to get over the fear that you're going to lose your job, or it's not going to reflect well on you, or that you're too old, or all of these other excuses that we tell ourselves when it's the young people and the people that are always getting called loony lefties and radicals. They're the people out there organising. They're the people out there that create the language that we later use to describe all of this shit. So it's just like we need to do more than just kind of feel kinship with them. We need to go and stand with them. We need to be prepared to say, no, fuck you, I'm not coming into work, and don't you bother crossing the picket line either.
Mm-hmm. But, Darren, that I'm looking at the time and thinking that's a nice kind of starting to tie things up, because it's very emotive, and I know a lot of nurses on here. A lot of the reason why Ed and I have this pod in our own little sad way is because we need to start finding a different way to engage and to communicate out with the kind of mainstream nursing environments.
This is the bit where we get complaints about what we say, isn't it?
Darren, see when I go down to see the NMC, you need to come with me, right?
I don't know if that'll help your cause.
I don't know, but it would be fucking fun. We can take a camera.
Okay, no worries.
I'll come and translate for the posh folks.
I'll come in a straight jacket.
Right. We'll need to get somebody to do subtitles for them now.
Aye, okay.
No, I suppose the one question I think we would like to know from yourself is, so what's next, Darren? What can we expect for you? What can we look out for?
Well, I'm still working on this second book, but I've not really got much of it done in lockdown. Although actually, all that stuff about social distancing and all of that, I think that's the unifying theme now of the second. So the working title of it is Proximity Warning, and you know, the subtitle will be something like Poverty, Affluence, and Why Social Distancing was the problem all along, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And what that allows me is, it allows me to use a lot of the content that I created for the book pre-pandemic, which is still valid, you know, particularly a lot of the travelling that I've done around the UK. You know, going to seaside towns like Margate, you know, that have just been absolutely left to become decimated after being like real hotspots for tourism all throughout the 20th century and even before Victorian times. You know, these places were the places to be. And then just the economic transitions that we went through in the 20th century, just never really foreseen or decided just to sacrifice these communities entirely. And that's where you get your UKIP councillors. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get, you know, you've got people in that community that are building walls, meaning that the local migrant population need to walk the long way around to their house because a landowner or a landlord's decided to build a big wall that would normally be a path in to make the property look a certain way from the outside, you know, and just like driving down a street and just seeing that the public services are so threadbare, it gives rise to all these myths about the uncleanliness of people of colour and people from Eastern Europe, and when really it's because people are taking their bins out and no one's coming to collect them, and the seagulls are ripping the bins open and the rubbish is all over the street, and people just walk up the street and think, well, that was the Romanians. And then you go into the Romanians' house and talk to them, their kids are all spots, cleaner than my kids. I mean, I don't know why I was surprised by that, but there you go, that's how subtle racism is. And I'm in there and I'm talking to them, and it turns out that they're getting paid, they're paying their landlords all these illegal fees, and because they can't speak the language properly, they don't know, they're getting totally fucked over. And like, I'm not prepared to put all that work I've done in the bin just because a pandemic's happened. But it's about how do you bring that stuff in, because most books that are currently being written that are non-fiction are redundant now because we've went through a paradigm shift, or we're in the middle of one. And that was the same with Brexit as well. I had to go back to the drawing board when the Brexit situation was resolving itself, because you've got to kind of write your book from a perspective where it's sort of tapping into something about currently what's going on. And the social distancing theme, I find, actually future-proofs the book. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you can apply that theme to the stuff from before, the normal that everyone wants to go back to for some reason. And then you can talk about, you know, what's been revealed from the pandemic. So I'll be like a fucking horse out the trap, man, when this lockdown lifts. And if it ever does. And if it doesn't, I'm going to have to declare myself an essential worker at some point, because I've got an October deadline now, and I'm nearly 2 years over my deadline. And if I don't get it done by October, it won't come out until 2022. And I just can't have it hanging over my head anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, I need to get it to fuck. Like, on a personal level, it's heavy stressful. Like, it's just like, it's a different kind of pressure. First pressure was, anybody going to give a fuck about this book? The second pressure is, I know tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are going to read it, and they're all going to wonder deep down inside, is it as good as the first book?
It's the difficult second album thing, isn't it?
It's harder than that.
Darren, if you can...
we appreciate it.
For anybody who's read the book and not had the opportunity to listen to the audio version, I have to say, having listened to the audio version, I really enjoyed hearing your own narrative and your own words. I've got every faith, based on what you've discussed with us tonight and the passion that you describe it with, that will come across in the page, very much as it did in the first book as well. I'm going to pull everything together for us tonight. I'd just like to see if Ed can open up the mic so that we can have a round of applause for Darren and an appreciation for his insight. And Ed, is he ready to go with it?
You have to warn me that you're going to ask me to do that.
Ah, boy.
There we go. We're all live now.
Can we have a round of applause? Thank you very much, Darren McGarvey. Brilliant, Darren. It's an absolute pleasure to bring someone onto the show to give us an insight and to make us think as well. And I think as mental health nurses, we're never done thinking, because I don't think we're the type of profession that ever stands up and says we know it all. I think we can always be learning. So Darren, thank you very much personally and on behalf of RMN Behaving Badly.
I'm just grateful. It's been really nice to just talk to someone outside my household. Like, I feel infinitely better than I did when I sat down here at 9 o'clock. So thank you for just for being there, and have a good weekend.
Yeah, listen, and this is the bit you get to see Ed do his outro. This is the pressure bit now. He's got one take of this, so he doesn't need to do any editing, Darren.
If I've got to edit it, I won't get to bed until 11:30. So thanks very much, Darren. Thank you very much, everybody. And here we go. Thank you for joining us for this special live episode of RMN Behaving Badly. And special thanks to our special guest, Darren McGarvey. You can join us in debating all kinds of stuff, some sensible and some silly, by following us on Twitter at RMNBB Podcast. Stuart is at Stuart McKenzie, and I'm at Ed Freshwater. Darren is on Twitter at Loki Scottish Rat. His website is darrenmcgarvey.com. His award-winning book, Poverty Safari, is available from Lueth Press and is also available on Audible if, like me, you like hearing people speak and can't get a damn moment to yourself to sit and read something in an actual book that isn't about a bear in a jumper or a lost mouse on a journey where he makes friends with a chicken and a wombat. Happy place. Happy place. Our website, rmnbehavingbadly.co.uk, is where you can find show notes, our blog, sign up to the mailing list, link to our social media accounts, and listen to all of the previous episodes. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Pocket Casts, SoundCloud, and all the other places where a pod might be cast. Go on and share the links with all of your friends, your colleagues, your pets, your enemies, anyone. We need higher listener numbers to feed our fragile, tiny little egos. This podcast is made possible thanks to our patrons, who send us a few quid every month to keep things going and growing. In particular, we want to thank Becky Hoskins, Cecilia Wigley, Davey, Derek Tyson, Jenny Lee Sims, Lauren Kennedy, Lee Orton, Maureen Dolan, Sarah Hyvey, the Venerable Lady Ali Upton, Billy Drysdale, Dion Daniel, Katie Sutton, Nat Frater, Natalie Brooks, Paul Jebb, Paula Shields, Phil Noyes, Sherry Aldith, Rod Thompson, and Andrea Spiropoulos. If you'd like to join them and support the work of the podcast, visit patreon.com/RMN Behaving Badly. The intro music is by EpiJ, and all the other tunes are courtesy of Kevin MacLeod. Once again, thank you for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Speak to you soon.